Art surrounds us, which means it's found everywhere we look. Today, you will need a large piece of paper, some practice paper, a pencil, and something to color with. Today, you will draw something that shows art surrounding us. Think about seascapes, cityscapes, underwater watercolors, the weather and sky around us, animals, or even the solar system. Think back to all of the projects that we've completed so far this year. Choose your favorite idea and start sketching it out on a practice paper with a pencil. My first idea was to draw the Earth, which is where we live, and then a beautiful solar system surrounding it, filled with art and colors. Quickly draw out your idea or a couple different ideas before you draw on your big paper. Here's a picture of a couple of sketches that I did first before I started on my 11 by 14-inch paper. I decided to go with a picture of a window and me looking out the window and seeing a beautiful landscape filled with animals, a sunset, and a prairie. To draw the window, I did 4 diagonal lines pointing in from each of the corner, and then I drew a rectangle inside of it to make it look like I was looking out of the window. You don't have to draw the same thing I'm drawing. You can draw anything that shows art surrounding us. Next, I drew 2 open windows by doing 2 diagonal lines going in and 1 straight line connecting it to make it look like the windows are open. Next, I added some more lines to the windows to add some details to them. Next, I drew a landscape outside of the window, starting with a hilly horizon line. Next, I added a circle for a low sun to look like the sunset is coming, and a few details like some pine trees and some birds. For the pine trees, I do a rectangle for the tree trunk and then some diagonal lines going diagonal in the left direction and the right direction to look like pine needles. Finally, I added a little farmhouse into the background. Next, I added some details such as a silo and some doors and windows. Think about what sort of things you see around you that look like art, and add little artistic details to your picture. I added a little fence and a little animal in the pasture that looked like beautiful art to me. Notice how I use little whisper lines with my pencil, which just means I'm drawing in the picture lightly with my pencil, and I can erase those lines or change them later. Finally, I wanted to add something to the foreground to add some depth to my artwork. The foreground is the area in front. So I added in little plants, pieces of grass, and flowers that looked like they were growing right outside the window in front of the farm field. Once you are happy with your whisper lines, you can start outlining your main lines with marker. I would suggest using a Sharpie or permanent marker if you don't want the lines to wash away if you're going to add some paint. I did end up adding some washable marker, such as the gray that I'm using now, but it did sort of blend out when I added the watercolor to it. But that's okay. It was a look that I liked in the end anyways. So depending on if you want your lines to say dark, I would use permanent marker. Or if you want a lighter faded look for your marker, you can use washable. I'm choosing realistic colors for my outline marker, such as green for the grass and gray for the windows and brown for the barn. Another option is you can also use crayon to outline some of your main lines, and crayon definitely won't wash away at the end after you add the paint. You don't have to outline every single line. I would suggest just outlining your main lines that you want to stand out. Or for a lighter look, you don't have to outline it at all. You can just skip to applying the paint. I wanted to use some brighter colors like orange for my flowers in the foreground so that they really stood out as being close and bright in the foreground. Finally, I chose to color in my animals in the pasture with crayon so that way the details of the animals would hold and would not wash away when I applied the paint. Remember, crayon does not wash away with paint. Finally, get out your watercolor supplies and a little bit of water. Make sure to keep your water far away from your computer, and you only need a little bit in the bottom. Notice how I always wet my brush in the water first, and then make a little circle in the color that I want to use. Here you can see how the green washable marker starts to blend out when it touches the water. If you like that blended look, you can use the washable markers in yours too. Continue to apply the paint in one small section at a time. Decide if you want to use realistic colors or if you want to use colors that are more fantasy. You could also use other mediums, such as colored pencils, markers, crayons, or other coloring utensils you may have at your house. You can see that water paint is a little bit harder to control and keep into the space that you want it to than, say, colored pencils would be. Colored pencils are a lot more precise in getting the color exactly where you want it to be. So if you have any small areas, you may want to use things like a sharp crayon or colored pencil in those areas. I decided to go with a realistic look with my colors for my farm field. Notice how I added different hues of color, some darker green and some lighter green in the pasture to make it look more realistic. I made the color darker by applying more paint and water to make the color lighter. It was a little harder to paint inside of my small little barn, and the colors did blend out. So you'll see that after it dried, I did go in with a more precise colored pencil to get the edges of the barn darker. Now I'm going to switch to the warmer colors for my sunset Notice how I used a lot of orange, yellow, and pink to make it look like the sun was setting. Here, I'm blending two colors together by putting my yellow paint over my orange paint to make my own yellow-orange sky. Remember, art is surrounding us everywhere we look. So look for beautiful colors and beautiful shapes around you for inspiration in this artwork. Finally, I finished off the sky by adding a little pink to the bottom of the sky. I didn't want any white to show through. I wanted the whole sky to be filled with the colors of fire. Finally, I finished off the painting portion by painting the area around the window, one of my favorite colors, purple. And I wanted to use a dark hue of purple around the outside, blending into a lighter hue of purple on the inside of the windows. So notice how I add more water on the inside to make it lighter and more paint on the outside to make it darker. Feel free to turn your paper in different directions to help you work on different areas of it. For the window shutters, I wanted them to be mostly white, so I just added a little bit of water to it to blend out some of that gray color on the lines. Finally, I added a little bit of green paint to my trees. Next, I let it dry for about an hour to see how it turned out at the end. I did want to make some of the color in some of the areas a little bit darker and a little bit more precise. Like I added a purple line around the edge of my window to make the purple really pop around the edge. I did this after my paint was all dry. Again, I am outlining some of the main lines on my window and my farm field with marker since they washed away with some of the water that I applied. Now I'm doing the same thing with my green markers to the tree, where I'm adding in those details again that may have washed away with the paint. And my very last step is I get out my colored pencil and I color in some of the details on my animals, barn, and plants. A sharp colored pencil is really good for getting in tiny details and the fine areas of your artwork. You can see here I'm filling in a little bit of colored pencil in the sky in some of the areas that got washed out by the water and paint. And here is my final project of Art Surrounds Us. If you would like to enter the contest, make sure to fill out the form and tape it onto the back of your art project. You also have to write a sentence explaining how your project is showing art surrounding us. Good luck and have fun.